Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
In fact, marriage is the greatest graveyard of hope. The phrase didn't originally have such a bad meaning, and it seems to a man that this poem was written in honor of sublime love. For him, marriage is not the joy of a lifetime, but the truest symbol of unhappiness, an uncomfortable family life where the relationship between husband and wife deteriorates day by day. He, on the other hand, has to pretend to be nice all the time, no matter how he is used. But all he got in return was disgust from his own children. And that was exactly why he didn't want to continue living in such a hell. So he planned to enjoy the beautiful life of a loner, ignoring the sadness of his friends. But still, the carefree and happy time he had had evaporated quite quickly. He proposed to one girl who was notorious in the empire for her cruelty to marry him. And she said she was only doing all this because she wanted to get him on his knees. When the guy heard this, he had no way of knowing what she was even talking about and thought she was even a little crazy. But it was all really just a dream. When the boy woke up, he realized he was dreaming again. He has been having the same dream for months now. In it, he keeps proposing to some strange girl. Even though it was certainly not reality, he had a feeling that very soon it might come true. He walked over to the table that was not far from his bed, drank a glass of water, and thought about the fact that if this happened, it would be just awful. Raven realized that this was definitely not going to happen, because it was a marriage proposal, and that went against his own principles. Soon someone suddenly knocked on his room, and he immediately asked who was there. Then from behind the door came a voice that turned to Mr. Raven and asked if he was awake yet. The man immediately recognized his butler, and so he said that he could certainly enter already. When the doors opened, an elderly man appeared behind them, and he wished the lad good morning and inquired if he had slept well last night. The butler only stood smiling for a while the gentleman answered him nothing. But Raven, pulling a false smile to his face, asked if there was anything he could do to please him. The butler immediately understood what he was talking about, so he laughed and said that it was absolutely impossible to hide anything from the gentleman. Afterwards, he added that it was really true. His father wanted to see him even from the morning. Raven was hardly surprised by this, only wary, for he realized that nothing good could come of it. He finished his glass of water, and setting it on the table, asked the butler to tell him that he would come as soon as he was ready. The aide bowed and said he understood, and then left to inform his father. At this very time, the man was sitting in his office looking out the window. He was thinking about many things, including his son. After a while, Raven finally came into his room. He apologized and asked if his father had called him. The man slowly turned to his son and told him that he had finally arrived and added that he should sit down, for he would like to talk to him. When the boy took his seat, the man sat down across from him and said he wanted to get right to the point. He held out a paper and said he wanted Raven to marry Princess Charlene. When Raven heard this, he was very surprised and asked if he was really talking about the same Princess Charlene. The man looked quite serious and, continuing to hold out the paper to him, said that everything was perfectly correct. The boy couldn't believe that his father was really saying this seriously and not joking. He had chosen her precisely because Charlene had been born into a ducal family of healers. This family is responsible for healing and cleansing absolutely the entire empire. On the other side is their deer family. Their ducal family, in turn, fights monsters and is constantly getting various injuries on the battlefield. So the lad had no doubt at all about the reason why his future wife had been chosen. Except there was one pretty big problem. This particular girl. This girl was incredibly famous throughout the empire for making men actually cry. Even though Raven had never met Princess Charlene, she was an overly famous person in high society. This girl is a very beautiful lady. However, her character really leaves a lot to be desired, so there wasn't a single person in the empire who hadn't heard about it. In fact, one day, her youngest son confessed his feelings to her, and she told him to just disappear, and that he could only be her personal doggy that she could get rid of at any time. This was the very real girl who just hates men with all her soul, and Raven couldn't believe that she could actually agree to marry him. In fact, oddly enough, she is known as the person who makes men cry, yet is known for making girls cry. And it was the exact opposite of being in a serious relationship. They were both contentedly famous throughout the empire, and instead of friendly conversation, he realized that he would likely be killed the first time they met. The two of them were silent for a while, and his father summarized by saying that everything had been decided, so there was no turning back. He said it was an order from His Majesty, so Raven would not be able to break the engagement as he had done all the previous times. Raven was incredibly surprised to hear such a thing and couldn't understand why it was happening. He turned to his father and told him what he probably knows himself. Like him, the guy likes loose relationships with girls and has no serious intentions. He suddenly laughed and said that he didn't want to get married at all and wasn't planning on doing so, certainly not in the next few years. His father sighed heavily after listening to him and said that was absolutely no reason to give up on the marriage. Moreover, if he broke off the engagement, he would marry his sister to the Marquis of L. The boy, when he heard this, was shocked. He couldn't believe that his father could actually allow his sister to be married off to this horrible pervert. In fact, his sister and Mr. L had too big of an age difference, and they looked like a child and a parent. So Raven, unable to bear it, started shouting at his father and asked if he really wanted to please His Majesty so badly that he was even willing to put his daughter in harm's way. The man was silent for a while, after which he said that if he didn't want to sacrifice his sister, he should agree. But at that moment their conversation was interrupted by the butler, who, knocking, entered the room and apologized for interrupting their conversation. He said Princess Charlene had arrived, so he had to report it. When Raven heard this, he was very surprised. He walked closer to his assistant and asked if she would be arriving at their estate soon. But the man replied that she was already there. He also said that he brought her to the gazebo, which is located in the garden, so he should go and greet her personally. When Raven heard that, he couldn't believe that his father had actually decided to keep it from him until the very end, when he would have no choice. For a while he sat and just stared at his father in silence. Then he got up and started to leave without saying a word to him. At this very time, there was a beautiful girl standing in the garden nearby. She was indeed very beautiful, but she didn't fit the atmosphere of the lovely and delicate flowers around her. Raven walked over after a while and from the bushes began to watch her. When he saw this Princess Charlene, he was even a little embarrassed, but he was brave enough to come closer to her. The girl heard footsteps behind her and turned to see who it was. When she saw him in front of her, she didn't say a single word, and the guy realized that the girl who stood in front of him looked just like the stranger from his dream. This surprised him incredibly much, for they were so much alike that he involuntarily wondered if this girl was the one who had come to him in his dreams. However, he thought that this could absolutely not be the case, so he bowed and said that they had met for the first time that day. He introduced himself, gave his name, and said he was the eldest child of the Deer family, and offered to sit down and have a cup of tea. The girl, without saying a word to him again, silently followed him and sat down opposite him. Then tea was poured for them, and they just sat and looked at each other. In fact, her gaze made her seem like an icy lady. But Raven was beginning to think that she wasn't as bad as everyone said she was. Maybe she just wanted to seem that way. So he figured he might even be able to negotiate with her amicably. Soon he decided to try his luck. So after apologizing, he said he wanted to hear from her what she thought about their engagement. Lady Charlene was silent for a while, after which, looking at him, she said that she didn't really mind it. When the guy heard this, he immediately began to rejoice, because it was a lie. A girl who hates men surely can't want to get married. Smiling, he immediately inquired why she had suddenly decided to marry him specifically. Charlene set down her cup of tea and suddenly stood up, starting to walk closer to him. Raven was starting to get very nervous about this and didn't even know what was going on. He was surprised at the abruptness with which she suddenly stood up, and soon, when he looked away, he saw that her face was very close to his. And the girl said in a quiet voice that she was only doing it because she wanted to make him kneel. Raven couldn't believe that those were exactly the words from his dream, so he felt uneasy. He immediately pulled her hands away from his body and tried to push her as far away as he could. The girl didn't fight back, but only looked with Raven at the hand he was suddenly holding tightly. The man realized he was being very rude, so he quickly let her go and apologized to her for it. Charlene was still surprised, but said that contrary to all the rumors, his reaction was quite naive, and added that he was like a puppy that one wanted to feel sorry for. However, she's not the kind of person who likes to feel sorry for people, so this reaction makes her want to tease even more. Raven looked at the girl in surprise and couldn't understand what was wrong with her. Then, coughing, he suggested that she return to their original topic. She took her seat, and then he said he was strongly opposed to their engagement. Raven, sighing heavily, said that he thought she would be as opposed to the marriage as he was, and wondered if she could tell him why she had actually agreed. She was silent for a while, and afterward she said it was all because she really liked him a lot. When the man heard this, he was so surprised that he couldn't even figure out if it was true or if she had decided to mess around again. He suddenly remembered at that moment all his previous candidates for wife, who had tearfully told him that they really loved him and could not live without him. In fact, true feelings hidden behind benevolence are often ugly. One day he learned that a girl wished to marry him only because of his fortune, for then she thought she could be safe. Mostly the ladies didn't want his love or any sincere feelings, but only his money and status. They saw in him only beauty, courage, and bravery, and never noticed his sincere feelings and desires. In the end, Princess Estrella and the people around her never changed, so it became too hard for the man to trust the girls. And it is for this reason that he does not know the girl's intentions and why she is trying to suddenly get close to his family. However, she can't marry him because he certainly doesn't want her to. Therefore, smiling, Raven said that he was sorry, however. He had decided that he would not marry a girl who sincerely disliked him. Charlene, hearing those words, didn't show a single emotion on her nonchalant face. For some time, the man still sat there, after which he stood up and said that he had nothing more to talk to her about, and, apologizing, said that he would be going now. He didn't wait for a single word from the girl, but just turned around and started to walk away, while she, in turn, continued to sit as if nothing had happened. As Raven moved as far away from the gazebo as possible, he began to analyze the whole situation and realized that despite everything, she was still just an incredible girl. What made him happy, however, was the thought that he would never see her again, so he could just forget about it. But at that moment, he suddenly felt some intense pain in his chest and began to immediately fall to the ground. At that moment, a girl in military uniform who was passing by saw him and immediately ran up, asking if he was okay. Raven himself didn't realize what had happened to him, but he said he was fine and asked how the situation was at the front. The girl was silent for a while. Then, with a heavy sigh, she said that the first unit that went to check the restricted area had informed her that they had encountered high-class monsters. When he heard about it, he was very surprised and said that he understood everything, so they should leave immediately. In fact, the squad he had sent to the Forbidden Zone should have been able to easily handle destroying these monsters, and so far, they hadn't appeared after being enslaved. Soon the guy along with the girl got up and started to leave, while Charlene, who had also decided to leave the gazebo, watched from afar. After a while, they finally arrived at the battlefield. There were several warriors trying to defeat the huge monster. Guy said they needed to do their best to hold out until their captain arrived, and then things would get better. But at that moment, the monster became even angrier and was about to attack the poor defenseless warrior who could not deal with him in any way. But in time, Raven arrived and slit the monster's throat, thus saving his subordinate's life. When it was over, he put his hand on his shoulder and told him they did a great job, so they could take it easy. The man was very surprised when he saw it, and thought that it was actually just now the very real power of a guardian. Raven turned to the second and third squad and asked that they check to see if there were any monsters left. The men immediately went to explore the area, while Raven turned to the girl he had come with and asked how the injured were feeling. The girl said they had no fatalities, but some had very serious injuries, and she didn't know if they would even be rescued if they even came back right then. The man, hearing this, became very angry. After thinking for a while, he turned to the first aid squad and told them to go to the manor right now with the injured. He also said that the others would be waiting for them there. But before he could finish the sentence, he suddenly saw something strange. Some petals began to appear around him, and he did not understand where they could come from, because there were no such trees nearby. At that moment, one of the warriors addressed him, calling him captain, and pointing somewhere in the direction, said that something unusual was going on there. The man immediately turned in that direction, and when he saw Charlene in front of him, he was confused. He immediately turned to her and asked what she was doing on the battlefield in the first place. The girl replied that after their dialogue, she was going to go home quietly, but she heard them talking about monsters. So she used teleportation to see everything in person. Looking at one of the warriors who was lying on the ground almost unconscious, she said that the miasmas had spread all over his body, so now she would clean everything at once and make him feel much better. She immediately activated her abilities, and more different petals began to appear around her. And in an instant, the warrior felt much better. His wounds were healed, and even the blood from his uniform was gone. When Raven saw this, he was incredibly surprised and didn't understand if all the warriors were cured thanks to just one person. In fact, their healers are experienced divine power users, however. This girl in front of him has such tremendous divine power that she could easily change the situation in a matter of seconds. But at this moment, when she finally finished her treatment, the girl was so engrossed that she didn't even notice the monster that was approaching straight towards her. Raven noticed him first and immediately turned to the princess. He wanted to run and try to save her, but to his surprise, everything went well. The girl herself was easily able to deal with this monster. She used her power to knock it out, and it fell to the ground with loud screams. He lay there screaming for a while, and then he got up, not realizing what was happening. He was about to attack the girl again, but she hit him again, and then he didn't wake up. All the men who were standing around were incredibly surprised, and Charlene turned to them and said that her hobby was killing monsters. Then one of the warriors ran to the captain and started hugging him, saying that this woman had killed the monsters with just a slap. He immediately asked, "Is he really hallucinating? Or is he just dead, and this is his some kind of ultimate hell?" However, Raven was very angry with him, for he began to molest him strongly and shoved him aside and told him to get off. However, as he thought about it, he looked at the girl who continued to stand behind him and really didn't understand who she even was. For some time, Charlene herself stood only looking at him. Then she came nearer to him and, taking his hand, told the prince that she promised always to protect him, so she wants him to marry her. The girl looked at him with her beautiful eyes, and the guy was very worried because she was doing it in front of everyone, and he felt awkward because of it. After a while, everything changed in a completely different way, and the guy was already riding in a wagon. And even though the weather was fine, he was on his way to the place of his death. In fact, thanks to Miss Estella's public humiliation that day, his life was completely changed. Everywhere Raven went, he kept being told to marry her. Whatever he did, there was intense pressure from his knights who had become her followers. All they kept talking about was the wedding, and that he must accept her proposal, for otherwise he would be the ultimate fool. Still, her divine power should only heal, so it was still a mystery to him how she was able to destroy the monsters then. In fact, divine power is a special energy that can fight monsters and miasmas, unlike magic, which absolutely anyone can use. Only the descendants of two great Herculean families can harness this power, the Deer family of knights and the Charlene family of healing. There was still no one who could use both powers at the same time, except for one person. That was the saint who had saved their empire from destruction long ago. While the man was riding in the carriage, he pulled out a letter asking if he would like to contract marriage. Some more time passed from that moment, and he finally arrived at the very place where Estella was already waiting for him. He went into the girl's room and apologized for making her wait so long. When she saw him, she immediately smiled and said that she herself had recently arrived. The place had a cozy atmosphere, and they decided to meet at a special coffee shop so that the atmosphere would be casual. The man was a little surprised and said that if he really liked it, he could come again, because they buy rare tea there depending on the season. Also, Raven, while looking at the menu, said that this place serves a very delicious sand pie that you should definitely try. Well, seeing the look she was giving him, he immediately realized that he needed to stop talking so much, and said that his sister said that this place was very popular with the girls, but they'd still better get right to the point. The girl agreed and said that her participation in the demon conquest was a prerequisite. The girl agreed and said that her participation in the demon conquest was mandatory. Stella said their rule would be valid until he received the title, and soon she would relinquish his property and rights as Duchess. When the man heard this, he was very surprised and asked if she was sure, for these conditions were too good for him. She said with a heavy sigh that she was deadly serious and was ready for any additional terms if they were needed. Raven began to study the girl with a surprised look and couldn't understand what she was up to, since she was known for hating men. But he was actually very curious as to why she suddenly wanted to marry him specifically, and had even lied to him about her love. Cheat for your goal. There is no need to lie to your feelings and say you love her just to achieve your goal. This contracted marriage is not always in effect, but with his power, his knights will not be endangered. He pondered her proposal for some time, after which he said he understood everything, and also offered to enter into a contract on just such terms. Stella, smiling, said she was glad he'd agreed after all. But then suddenly, he said that he was rumored to be playing with girls' feelings, so there was a possibility that he would have a mistress while he was married to her. He also said he couldn't make her happy, so he asked if she would regret marrying a man like him. Estella put her head down at this point and said, reflectively, that she had lost a lot of things, so she was tired of worrying about it all for so long. So in a confident voice, she said that she wasn't going to regret it all because she had married him. Raven was a little surprised at her confidence. However, having written the contract, he said that he understood, and added that if she was satisfied with everything, it was very well. He then handed her the papers and told her that he had already put his signature on them. All that was left was hers, and it would be done. In fact, Stella began to scrutinize him. She noticed that he looked friendly, but had a particular attitude of not letting anyone overstep the boundaries of what was allowed. His cold stare, hidden behind such a friendly smile, made even her a little wary. Well, then suddenly she thought about the fact that if she were in the same position, she would probably do something similar. But she had her own reasons for being around him. Now she could proceed with her plan. At that moment, she reached forward and began to use her magical abilities. The man, seeing this, was very surprised, and taking her hand, asked her what she was even doing. Estella replied that she had just signed the contract with her magic and didn't understand why he was suddenly so anxious. He was incredibly angry and started yelling at the girl, asking why she even did it. He also added that if she breaks her promise, she will have to pay a high price for it, perhaps even with her life. Estella looked at him in surprise and didn't realize what this man's true face was, for she thought he was cold. But now he was angry at the man he had hated before. He slapped his hand on his forehead and wondered what she was even doing, for he didn't understand how she could have agreed to such terms. But the girl, smiling, said that absolutely nothing had changed, so he shouldn't worry so much. Raven, sighing heavily, said that she was indeed right. Then the girl said that he had asked her earlier if she would regret it, and wondered if he wasn't worried about keeping that promise himself. She took his hand and pulled him closer to her, telling him that she was sure he could still fall in love with her. So this, on the contrary, was her advantage. The man immediately moved away from her, as if he had been seared with boiling water, and felt very uncomfortable about it. Estella smiled smugly and thought about the fact that this was all quite a bit of fun. Then she said that they probably wouldn't have any surprises, especially since that line about her falling in love with him was the first thing he said. Soon, this news spread throughout the estate, and the maids were incredibly excited that the wedding of Mr. Raven and the princess of the Charlene family was finally going to happen. One of the maids said that this was indeed the case. A room had to be ready by next week, so they would be very busy in the near future. The maids rejoiced, for at last there would be a mistress in their manor, and this was very good news for them. They also wondered who would be her personal maid. One of them said with a heavy sigh that she wasn't interested in that, as long as the atmosphere inside the mansion remained calm, and the rest didn't matter. She also said that Mr. Raven has a girlfriend who is rumored to be his lover, and Princess Charlene probably doesn't know about it. Raven was sitting in his office at this very moment, working on some papers. It was already dark, but he couldn't leave things undone. Soon someone knocked on his room. It was a girl, and when he opened the door, he was a little surprised to see her. But then, smiling, he said he had been waiting for her, and also inquired if she had managed to get there safely. This girl was Catherine. She was in a special chalet so as not to attract unnecessary attention to herself. Catherine walked forward and said that indeed everything was all right. Then she saw some papers that were lying on his desk. He immediately told her to wait a little longer. He would finish with all the paperwork and they could be alone. He pointed somewhere to the side and asked her to wait for him there. But at that moment, Catherine grabbed his arm and pulled him closer to her. The girl said that he came to this place dressed like a girl, and so she doesn't understand why he has to dress up like that for ordinary treatment. In fact, it was Catherine who was the guy who treated the gentleman all the time. At this point, Raven, laughing nervously, replied that it was all because he had almost been recognized that day. Once when a guy was badly injured, he came to heal him again. It took quite a while. But at that moment, someone suddenly entered the room and asked if Mr. Raven was all right. The man, when he heard those voices, was immediately frightened. He saw that they were his knights, so he took his healer and pretended that he had decided to have some privacy with this girl. Then he turned to them, angry, and said that he was a bit busy at the moment, so he asked if they could not disturb him. When the knights saw this, they were very surprised that he had brought a strange girl, but realized that they had to leave. So after apologizing to him, they walked out the door, slamming it behind them, and said they didn't mean to disturb him. At that moment, Raven looked straight at his healer and apologized, asking for him to fulfill one request of his. The man was incredibly surprised by such behavior and couldn't believe that the gentleman was actually asking for such a thing. But what Raven really needed to do was hide from everyone that he needed treatment, and he got Keith involved in the scam, which was exactly what he was doing. Keith told the gentleman that he should undress and get into bed so they could finally treat him properly. Raven, of course, obeyed his healer. He took off his shirt and sat on the bed, and the boy began to use magic to cure his bad condition. He immediately asked how he was doing. The man smiled and said that he was better, and it was thanks to his treatment. He was no longer sick and felt very well. Kate stared at the man for a while and realized that he was absolutely no good at lying, for it was obvious from the look on his face that he was still in pain. But sighing heavily, he thought not to stress him too much, and said that Puddles had a healing spell on him, so he should feel better soon. Even if he told him not to use divine power, Keith still wouldn't listen to him. In fact, only the direct descendants of Dyer possess the seal that designates them as a guardian, and such people possess immense divine power that is incomparable to ordinary power. One person is capable of destroying even hundreds of monsters. That's why it's such a hassle, because that's why Raven possesses such a seal. Even though the guy knows that using divine power will cause him to be lethal, he will still continue to use it to protect his men as long as he has the power. As a consequence, He sacrifices himself to keep everyone else alive. Soon, Keith finally finished and said that the treatment had come to an end. The man didn't understand why the gentleman was so stubborn, but he knew that he wouldn't listen to his advice anyway, so taking action would be useless. At this moment, Raven sat on his bed and said the words he was saying were completely contrary to his actions and was very angry, for the treatment was never pleasant. And so, some time had passed since then, and the butler who accompanied the gentleman was incredibly happy. He said that this day was incredibly beautiful. Raven, who was walking behind, turned to Henry and said it was the 100th time he'd said it that day, and it was starting to annoy him a little. But the man, angry, said that, of course, for he had waited so long for this moment, his boy, or should he call him Little Duke after all? Raven felt just plain disgusted, so he told him to do what he always did, and no more. After a while, they came to the room, and the butler, opening the door, said that at any rate, an old man like himself was relieved that his boy would not die all alone. But Raven replied that this girl was so straightforward that it defied her common sense. The man, upon hearing this, immediately laughed and said that he couldn't believe that his boy praised her for being such a unique and beautiful girl. The guy, angry, asked if he had even heard him because he had not praised this girl at all, but rather insulted her in this way. In fact, Estella is the type of girl who makes it a point to bring you to your knees the first time you meet her. And the guy can't imagine how she would behave towards the one she truly loves with all her soul. At this very time, a girl was riding in a wagon and sitting there reading one very interesting book. It was called Top Tips to Make an Unapproachable Man Fall in Love with You. The first step there was the point to make a memorable first impression on your partner. The second step was to show him what she was even capable of, all of which the girl was just about able to accomplish. The third step was the point of having an exciting time behind closed doors. Estella, after reading this, was very surprised and couldn't believe the next time they needed to be alone in a locked room. However, she did not understand why this man was acting like a wild animal with her. She realized that the two of them could not be in a closed room together, for he would avoid it in every way. Then she thought about tying him up, and she didn't know if such a method could solve the problem. Estella laughed and thought it was a pretty good idea. The girl who only knew about love from love novels really thought it could work. After a while, she had already begun to drive up to his estate and thought that perhaps she should have arrived a little earlier, but it was too late to contemplate such a thing. The carriage pulled up, and there she was already being greeted by servants and maids, along with the gentlemen standing around her. Henry didn't take his eyes off Raven, who was just as he approached them, and asked, "Has his boy come to greet her in person?" The man did not show as much enthusiasm as his assistant and said that everything was right. Then the coachman helped the girl out of the carriage. And at that moment, Raven ran up to the girl and, shouting her name, lifted her in his arms, saying that he had been waiting for his dear wife for a very long time and was very glad she had finally returned. The evening before that day, the man sat in his study and asked the butler what the reaction of the people around him to his engagement to the princess was after all. Henry replied that those who work at this place have been madly happy for their master for a very long time. On the other hand, many young men were from the imperial capital, and they were very worried about this kind of situation since they knew the rumors about the princess. It wasn't enough to do any harm, however, and seeing Raven's surprised face, he wondered if it really bothered him that much. The man answered nothing to this. He pondered whether there were any more evil rumors about it. He was sure that of course there were, for the same thing always happens. The young men said that this girl was the flower of the empire, who had won the hearts of many men, yet the Duke hates his wife. The ladies considered it a great shame, yet still understood how the Duke felt all the same. It was actually quite funny that so many men had feelings for her, yet the man she had fallen in love with did not love her back. Raven was just a little kid then, when these were all the rumors about his mother and father, and he was incredibly hurt for his dear mother. There's no way to know when the princess will be the subject of rumors, and even if she isn't, apparently she's not very good at socializing, so this kind of thing is just inevitable. After pondering for a while, Raven asked that the butler henceforth not allow anyone he deemed dangerous to approach the mansion. And he also said he would make sure she could spend her time without any inconvenience. And on the morning when he was to meet the girl, he thought of the time for the play to begin. When he lifted the girl into his arms, she was incredibly surprised and could not utter a single word. And the maids on either side of her immediately began to smile. They thought of him calling her dear wife, and it happened quickly enough. And the butler, together with his physician, when they saw such behavior, were incredibly surprised, especially Henry, who had seen the man's dislike of her person from the beginning. Before long, Raven finally set her on the ground and asked if she was tired after the long journey to his estate. Without waiting for an answer, he said she needed to get some proper rest in her room first, and continued to smile. Henry and the maids didn't understand what had happened at all, nor where the previous master, who quite openly never behaves like this, had gone. The girl continued to remain silent, and the man put his arm around her shoulder and walked into the manor with her, incredibly happy to do so. He soon escorted the girl to a room and, opening the door for her, led her inside. The maids, who were standing nearby, seeing all this, were simply delighted by such gentlemanly behavior of the gentleman. However, when the door closed, the man exhaled in relief and turned away from his future wife, saying that he had almost stopped breathing. Then Estella finally spoke, saying that those were her words. Then, looking at him, she said that they needed to talk. The man agreed with her and said that he had cast a soundproofing spell to begin with, and now they could start talking, for he was quite sure they would be overheard. The man then stepped away from her at quite a distance, and when she saw this, she asked if he seriously thought it was so necessary. After being quiet for a while, she also said that she thought he was standing too far away to start a conversation, and added that she certainly wouldn't bite him, not unless he asked her to. But Raven felt uncomfortable being alone with her, so he said that distance was fine with him. The girl sighed heavily, and as she decided to move closer to him, she noticed that as she took each step, the man took a step back from her. She soon gave in after all, and smiling, said that in that case she proposed to start their conversation and called him Mr. Puppy. Raven, smiling, thanked her for understanding and called her the truest of evils. They were not very happy to see each other, however their fake smiles looked very convincing. Estella thought as she looked at him that this man was incredibly annoying, and the only good thing about him was his cute face. Then she sighed and said that despite all that, his actions were truly disgusting, and wondered if he really planned to continue this horrible act. Raven replied in all seriousness that that was exactly what it was. He said it annoyed him when people spread false rumors about their relationship that were based on nothing more than unfounded assumptions. He said afterward that it wasn't that bad for them after all, so he didn't see it as a problem. The girl, upon reflection, realized that it was certainly much better than treating her badly, but wondered if he was really okay with that. And also asked if he would have felt uncomfortable if there had been rumors that he had fallen madly in love with her, despite having doubted her for a long time. But the man replied that it wasn't that he trusted her completely. Despite the fact that they had a contract, he had made the decision to marry her himself. Naturally, it bothers him quite a bit, however. He can't do anything about it. Estella immediately thought that the reason he was treating her like a loved one while a lot of people looked on was probably to protect her from the horrible rumors that would spread. This is a regular duty for him, but these actions have no special meaning for her. However, she is the only one who expects the unprecedented kindness he will show her. So she agreed, and said with a smile on her face that he is indeed a good-natured man. But then suddenly, with a sneer, she inquired whether he was an idiot after all. The man was annoyed by such vulgar behavior, so he said that of course it was the former, and he was not an idiot, as she might have thought. Afterward, the girl moved closer to him and told him that if he was doing the bare minimum like that, then spending the night with her was part of his plans too, for sure. When Raven saw it and felt the warmth of her body close to his, he immediately blushed. He felt embarrassed because he'd never even thought about it. At this time, the second squad leader, a man named Daniel, was joined by other warriors who had seen everything that had happened. And when they told him the situation, the guy was very surprised and asked, "Has their captain gone crazy?" Another man suggested that this was indeed the case. It was the commander of the third squad, Asher. He turned to Daniel, smiling, and wondered if he kept hearing that because he had shit in his ears. But at that moment, the commander of the first squad, named Theo, intervened in the conversation and asked if the two were not in love with each other. It seemed to him that a real spark had flashed between them. Daniel, walking forward, replied that anything was possible. However, they would soon learn the exact answer to that question. But the moment they approached the room, Asher noticed that some sort of spell had been cast on it, and it surprised him greatly. He said, taking a closer look, that it even looked like a sound or isolation spell. Daniel was a most unscrupulous warrior, so he said that, in other words, it was okay to come in. He opened the door and turned to the leader, wondering why he was hiding in the middle of the day. When the warriors saw him next to the girl, they were very surprised, for his arm was around her waist. They were quite frightened when the boys entered. They quickly ran out the door and, closing it behind them, apologized, becoming anxious again. When Raven saw this, he became very indignant and wondered if they were really going to leave him here alone. Stella, stepping closer to him, said that he was the one who invited her, so she asked what the minimum would be already. The warriors Ajar replied that if he invited the girl to his place, he should take responsibility himself, so they certainly couldn't help him in any way in this situation. After that, the door closed again, and the man could not believe that they had really done that to him. Some time had passed since then, and Raven had gone to the bar for some relaxation. He was sitting at a table and was sad when suddenly Asher came up to him and told him that it was rare for him to be offended by them for so long. Following him, Theo came over with a kebab in his hands and said that when he wasn't feeling well, he ate a lot and then went to pump his muscles. Raven looked at the boy and immediately told him not to say such things to Daniel, for he was a man who solved everything with his muscles. Theo, smiling, said he understood and then took a bite of his kebab. He was silent for a while. Then he turned to the captain and asked when they were going to have a child. Raven was surprised to hear such a question and even choked on the beer he was drinking. Wiping his face from the droplets, he said it was a rather unexpected question, and the man, laughing, replied that he would love them equally. Theo said he didn't care if it was a boy or a girl, they would all be beautiful. Then the man, smiling, replied that they weren't in the relationship the guy thought they were. In fact, there used to be times when Raven thought about how he didn't want to be like his parents, and when he got married, he would build the happiest family in the world, until he learned his fate one day that the person who got the keeper's seal must live a short life as payment. So from then on, he saw no point in being with someone who would love you, because in the near future, he would die anyway, and by doing so, he would only be doing a great deal of pain to a loved one. After their ancestors founded the empire, monsters and mismos suddenly began to appear, and the entire continent was plunged into chaos. And then all the inhabitants were in despair. But a great saint and a guardian knight appeared. These two erected a protective barrier that drove away the monsters, and now people are being protected by the Charlotte family, who are responsible for clearing miasmosis and healing. And also the Deer family, which provides protection and subjugation for the monsters. Conquering monsters had always been a rather dangerous endeavor, and from the perspective of the group members, if a princess with powerful divine strength participated in the raid, it would be much easier to deal with it. And soon the men took Estella into their squad, and she was dressed in their uniform. When they were going on another outing to defeat the monsters, Asher said that the princess really looked good in their uniforms, and that he was glad she had decided to go with them. He thought it would be the most excellent trip ever, and in fact everyone here was happy for her, except for Raven. Some time passed, and they finally reached the place where the battle was to be fought. The man and the girl stopped not far from their squad. He turned to them and said that from now on they would be killing monsters, and this was no festival, but the conquest of the truest monsters, so they shouldn't get so excited and wipe those silly smiles off their faces. He inquired if they understood at all. The men were not very happy about it because they wanted to take things a little easier. Then one of them said that he didn't understand what all the trouble was for, since the princess could easily destroy the monsters with just a slap. Danielle turned to the commander and wondered if maybe she should join them in destroying these monsters, and then things would go much faster and more efficiently. He also said that it would be quite difficult to heal them, so they needed as much strength as possible. Raven continued to smile, but at the same time he looked angrily at his subordinates. He realized that they wouldn't leave him alone, so he decided to explain one very important thing to them. The man said that the support squad would definitely come to them. In fact, they would continue to prove their support as usual, but they would still destroy the monsters as before. When the man heard this, he was immediately upset, for they had hoped that the job would be much easier, and so nothing had changed in fact. Estella stood aside for a while, silently observing what was happening. She was also drawing conclusions in parallel. Soon Keith approached the man and told him that the gate preparations were complete, and at any moment one could move to the battlefield and already start the resistance. The man said that was just fine, then turned to the other warriors and asked that they stop suffering already and gather at the gate at last. After that, he turned to the girl and suggested that they should already move out. You see, the monsters certainly wouldn't wait, so the sooner they started, the sooner they would finish. As they set off, the girl decided to go back to that conversation and said that it was indeed true that it would be faster if she participated in destroying the monsters. So she wondered why he wouldn't let her do it. The man was silent for a while and then asked if it was right that she wanted to leave them. And besides, as he had said earlier, it would be much more effective to team up with her and conquer the monsters. But after that, he wondered what would happen to them after she left. They would get used to such support and would not be able to go back to their previous skills, so he should not let them relax. That's why he felt it would be much more helpful if she could cooperate and support them, but not completely do everything for them. Raven, smiling, said, putting her life in her hands so that she could protect him. Many hours had passed since then, and it was beginning to get dark outside. At last the battle was over, and the warriors could breathe a sigh of relief. Daniel, with a smile on his face, said that it had been quite a fun day destroying those monsters. So he added that it was quite a surprise when the princess killed the monster that attacked the support team with a single blow. He didn't know that he could kill them with his bare hands like that. Raven, as he walked beside the girl, thought about the fact that surely she was paying close attention to the movements of the participants and supporting them accordingly. And because of that, conquering monsters became much better than it was before. He walked for a while and watched the girl closely. But soon she felt his eyes on her, so she turned around and said that he had attacked her first and she wasn't trying to stand out in any way. She felt as if he were judging her for intervening, but the man immediately smiled and said that she had saved their doctors' lives after all, so he was incredibly grateful to her for that. When Estella heard this, she looked at him in surprise and couldn't tell if he was now playing to the audience or really grateful. But the man, turning away, also said that now she should go to the support squad and ask them to have them cleanse her of the spoils of the miasma's conclusion. After that, he said that they were done for the day and was about to leave when suddenly someone pulled him to himself by his cloak. Of course it was Estella, and she said she could clear it. But the man asked that she not do it, for she must be very tired, and also that there were other people who needed it. However, the girl got very angry and said that if she said she would do it, she would do it. The man realized it was best not to bicker with her in such a state, so he drew his hand to her and told her to take care of him in such a case. She, seeing this, wondered if he was joking, for in cleansing and healing, the wider the area of penetration with the skin, the more effective. So if he understood everything, he should not slowly take off his clothes so that everything would be in order. By then it was getting dark. They came to a bench, and the man took off his shirt. Estella, after a quick examination, said he was fine, but his magic mana was a bit stagnant, so she asked if he didn't happen to sleep much. Raven tried his best not to look at her and looked away, and answered nothing to her question. Then she told him that he needed to rest as much as possible. The man felt very uncomfortable about this because he was sitting half naked in front of his future wife. Even though he had no feelings for her, it was still unusual for him. Estella suddenly started poking his pumped-up chest, thinking that it must be very firm, and when she did, indeed her assumptions were justified. But when she wanted to do it again, the man grabbed her hand and asked her to stop. In fact, Estella used to feel a little uncomfortable when she was near him. So many girls were in love with Raven that even neighboring countries knew about it. They longed to be in his arms at least once. There were rumors about him, both good and bad. He was also known as a horrible person who disrespected the girls he dated. However, no matter how bad the rumors were, his popularity did not subside, and all the girls wanted at least once to be near him. The girl herself took the rumors about him, which were in high society, at face value. In the end, however, she must have been mistaken. She was silent for a while, after which she inquired if he was still a virgin. He didn't answer anything. They went back to the room quickly enough, and the girl laid him down on the bed and began to molest him. She said in a gentle voice that she couldn't believe it would be his first time. However, she added that he should not be afraid because he was in good hands. Raven didn't understand what was going on and asked that she calm down. After all, they'd better talk first. But the girl ran her fingers over his muscular body and wondered if he really wanted to have a conversation right at such a delicate moment. She was about to unzip his pants when he suddenly jumped up and started yelling at her, telling her to stop doing that and to stop already. The man was all red, and soon, when he opened his eyes, he saw the healer in front of him, who was again dressed in women's clothes. It took him a while to realize what was happening. Then he felt very ashamed and realized that he had fallen asleep and that he had just dreamed the whole thing. His body was all shaking with intense emotion, and with a heavy sigh, he said he was incredibly glad it was just a dream, because in reality he certainly wouldn't have experienced such a thing. Keith, who was standing nearby watching him, immediately assumed that the man was probably having some kind of nightmare. But after that, they started having a conversation, and the man inquired if she had really found out he was a virgin. Raven didn't bother to answer that question, for he already knew the boy had guessed everything, and he also didn't like the stigma. Keith, on the other hand, said he was pretty lucky that it came out right now, because the reason he took advantage of the rumors that he was a womanizer and liked to play with girls was to avoid marriage. And now that he's engaged to the princess herself, there's no need for that anymore. Raven averted his gaze from him and said that in principle he was right, but even now he was being influenced by her, and it irritated him. Now that she knows his secret, she can easily manipulate him and also spread various rumors. He assumed she might be saying that he really had no experience, so she was making him scream loudly and even get on his knees. When Keith listened to all of the gentleman's concerns, he said he wasn't going to lend him his hand anyway, so the man might as well not even hope. Raven moved closer to him, and the guy said that even if she found out, it wouldn't be a problem. But he replied that he was too embarrassed about it. Soon afterward, they had tea, and the guy said that even on this day he tried his best to be bad, but still it didn't work out. Keith started to leave the room and said it was too late, so he would head down the hallways towards his bedroom. And at that moment, Estella, who had also gone out into the corridor to take a little walk and get rid of her insomnia, saw him in the form of a girl. She immediately decided to follow him for a while and didn't realize who this girl even was, since she had never seen her before. In fact, it's been 2 weeks since she went to live in the Duke's mansion, and thanks to Raven's plan, her life is very contentedly peaceful. Eventually, their relationship got to the point where they even call each other by their first names. She thought so, but after watching Raven's reaction, she concluded that he'd never really fallen in love, so she believed the rumors were only half true. One morning, when the maid was brushing the lady's hair, she suddenly saw her sad expression and wondered if something was troubling her. Estella said that last night she had seen a woman come out of Raven's bedroom, so she asked if the maid knew anything about it. The maid smiled nervously and said that she was very sorry, but she didn't know anything about it, and at this moment her body suddenly began to shake because she was very worried. Estella noticed it right away, but didn't emphasize it, and said that she understood, and added that she shouldn't apologize at all because of it. She looked at the maid and added that it wasn't like she had told her about her master's loyalty without permission, so she had something to be proud of as a maid. The maid was a little surprised. At that moment, the girl started to leave and said that she was also happy to know that the maid must be serving Raywan. When the maid heard this, she was very surprised, for Mistress Estella was not at all like the girl from the rumors she had heard. She really loves Raven-san, for otherwise she wouldn't be able to make such a kind expression on her face. Estella walked down the hallway and thought about how Raven probably didn't have the same relationship with that girl she'd seen last night. However, if a rival appears, she doesn't want to lose, because after all, she is the one who is called the cruelest girl in the Empire. As she passed the window, she saw her reflection there and wondered if there was any girl at all who was better than she was. Then, looking out the window, she saw the guys practicing and decided she should take certain precautions. At this very time, Raven was in the courtyard with his subordinates, and they had arranged a training session to keep in shape. At rest, he told the others that they were resuming training at the training ground after the break, so they could take it easy a lot. After that, he looked to the side and saw the girl suddenly approaching him. He was very surprised. Raven immediately approached her and warily wondered what she was even doing in this place. Had she really come here to tease him? When Estella saw his facial expression and demeanor, she didn't understand why he was so wary. However, in a relaxed voice, she suggested that they have lunch together that day. When the man heard this, he didn't know if she was serious. He stepped closer to her and told her it wouldn't be difficult to accomplish, and asked if that was all she wanted. But Estella said that wasn't all, and also asked if he wanted to go on a real date with her tomorrow. Raven looked at her in surprise and wondered what kind of date we were even talking about. In fact, when it comes to dating, everyone is happy to talk about going out and having dinner together, and afterward there's a hot night out. He thought back to the words of his mentees, who always discussed dating and said it ended just like that. And so when Raven thought about the dream he'd had recently, he realized that if he went on a date with Estella, she would definitely do it with him. The man immediately blushed and became angry because he didn't know what he should even do. The mere thought of such a thing was already frightening him. He realized that as soon as she found out he was a virgin, she immediately asked him out, and decided that this girl was just awful. And also, given Estella's eccentric behavior until then, his answer, of course, would be no. Smiling, the man said that it wasn't that he was dreading a date with her. However, he had a lot of things planned for tomorrow, so he just couldn't agree. The man also said he was sorry and then turned around and started to leave, saying he had to go now too. But the moment he stepped back, Estella grabbed him by the shirt, and he couldn't even take another step. Then he stopped and decided to try again, but it was all useless, for the girl had a very good grip. Raven turned around and looked her straight in the eyes, and wondered if she was a gorilla, for he didn't understand why she was so strong. And the girl then said in a quiet voice that in order to find out if she was a gorilla, she should try to grab someone's head. Perhaps then she could know for sure. And afterward, looking him straight in the eye, she inquired if it was true that he was really busy tomorrow, and added that if he lied to her, he had better watch out. The man realized he couldn't lie anymore, so he said that maybe he really was free tomorrow. He needed to check exactly on his schedule. After a while, they returned to the mansion, and Raven replied that he didn't mind going on a date, but they had to be back at the mansion before 7 in the evening, and that would be his main condition. When Estella heard this, she was very surprised and could not believe that the curfew on the dear estate was special. The man, on the other hand, was thinking about the fact that if they were home by this time, Estella wouldn't attack him on the date. After pondering for a while, the girl still agreed to it and said that in that case, they would make a promise to each other, and she held out her little finger to him at that moment. When Raven heard this, He was very surprised and wondered if she really meant to cut her finger. But the girl replied that that wasn't quite true. When a man who had made a promise breaks it, he should cut him. After some thought, Raven agreed and shook her little finger. Then the girl let him go and told him that they had sworn an oath, and if he ran away, he would definitely be in trouble. She turned around and started to walk away, and Raven stood there staring at his finger, not understanding what had happened at all, and most importantly, what was the point of making a promise for the sake of a date? In fact, when a person swears, he usually cuts his finger. When such a thing is done, it does not appear that he can break it. However, as Raven himself had said, it was only a small promise. However, the girl was incredibly happy about it, because she loved him so much that she was willing to do such a thing. When evening came, the man sat in his office contemplating where he should go on this date after all. Raven had been thinking for hours about the various places they could go, but he still couldn't make a final decision. He even thought about the fact that they could take a boat ride on the lake, which was known for its beautiful scenery, or see the opera, which was quite popular now, or perhaps they should even just go and eat at a cafe. He thought all those options were good, but he couldn't decide on one. It was too hard for Raven to make a decision. Suddenly, Keith, who was standing next to him, turned to him and told him to get to work, or he wouldn't have time to do anything at all. At that moment, a man suddenly knocked at his office. It was Asher, who asked if he could come in. The man said, "Of course you could." Then the door opened ajar and a young boy showed up. He said that the third squad had just returned from an investigation. When he entered the room and moved closer to the commander, he said that the results of the investigation of the restricted area where the monsters had reappeared showed that a puddle of miasma had appeared as expected. Raven was a little upset when he heard that and said that he understood. He also said that monsters appeared once every 2 or 3 years, and if he left it like that, monsters would keep coming out. However, Asher replied with a smile on his face that since such an occurrence was quite rare, and the last time it happened was years ago, he felt that he shouldn't worry so much. In fact, a puddle of miasmas is also called a sign that something strange is going to happen. The year in which it happened was a very unfavorable year, so Raven knew that they had to take action immediately. After pondering for a while, the man turned to them and offered to put up a barrier and deal with him so that no more monsters would appear there. Asher agreed with him and immediately began writing down the man's errand and asked if he wanted to go there tomorrow. Raven immediately replied that tomorrow was the day he was going to go there. They needed to get this sorted out as soon as possible. But then suddenly Raven remembered that he had a date planned for tomorrow, so he declined and said he'd go there alone right now. When Keith heard this, he was very surprised, but Asher, on the contrary, was delighted and asked if he had any definite plans for tomorrow.